Coaches, we are all meticulous when it comes to session planning, game planning, tactics, personnel, substitutions, and how to manage the minutia of our craft and of a game, how to manage the clock and use timeouts effectively. In all of these variables, our attention to detail is so tuned in and exact. But are we that intentional with the relationships that we form with the people we lead? Managers, CEOs, you fine-tune budgets down to the last penny for the course of a year, or even further out in longer pieces of time. How intentional are you in your conversations with the people that work for you and with the people you lead that are also leaders? That's what we're talking about today in this episode of The Tribe Has Spoken. We're discussing being intentional. That involves awareness and being acutely in tune and aware and sincere and honest in the way that we approach people and how we pay attention to the things that matter to them and the signals that they are giving us verbally, non-verbally, and how involved in our lives we get. How intentional are we? We're going to be talking to Lisa Petit. Lisa was a basketball coach, women's basketball coach, at various levels, junior high, high school, even collegiately in Division I and II schools, as well as the WNBA. Lisa has used the skill and the master craft of being intentional in relationships with her players in order to build stronger relationships, have a stronger connection, create a line of communication with them and with her teams so that she could deliver information, feedback, as well as receive communication succinctly, concisely, and thoroughly so that she can help them be better people. And then the player follows the person. She built relationships first before she built her players, and she did it using intention in everything she did. If you want to learn more about the tool of being intentional, we have just built a course for coaches and captains called the Captain's Course. If you want to know more about it, I'm going to be releasing a short very soon with some activities and videos from the course. The course is free for the first 10 coaches to sign up, and all you have to do to sign up is send me an email at tribehasSpokenChief23@gmail.com, and it's all together in all lowercase letters. Sign up, develop your skill of being intentional, create those lines of communications with your players. I hope you enjoy this discussion with Lisa today, with Coach Petit. She is going to tell you just how easy, but at the same time so very difficult it is to be intentional. You have to do it proactively, and you have to attack the process of being intentional with the same attention you give to the tactics and your budgets and your personnel and your rosters. You have to sit down and sit in and lean in to the needs of the people you lead and set yourself aside so that you can be fully aware of what the people you lead need. That's being intentional. Welcome back to The Tribe Has Spoken. Welcome back to The Tribe Has Spoken. This is a leadership podcast where we specifically dive into servant leadership. And we have a special guest, dear friend of mine and former co-teacher, Lisa Petit. Lisa, say hello to everybody.
Hi, everyone.
I'm so excited to have you on. We have talked about doing this for so long and just haven't gotten around to it because life happens. Captain Alan Thompson is away on military duties. And so I have been after Lisa, trying to pin her down to do this because there is not enough time in this podcast or in a week's worth of podcasts for anyone listening to take away the nuggets that Coach Petit is going to give to you today, that she's going to bless you with.
Sweet.
Lisa has had a coaching career that covers quite the spectrum. From high school to middle school to ninth grade to collegiate to professional, basketball, soccer, and who knows what else in between. Basketball is her first love. And Lisa, what we had briefly spoken about is what is on your heart, and that being, coaches, you need to be more intentional.
Well, first off, I'm so excited to be here. I can't even tell you how excited I am, and I'm so thankful for you. And I just love what you're doing. I love the conversations you're cultivating, really. It's not even like nuggets and awareness. It's just so authentic, and I'm excited. I'm praying for more listeners because you just are so wise. I tell everybody, I'm like Coach Castillo and his wisdom. I've been so blessed to be a friend of yours, but also to get to learn from you. So I'm happy to be here.
Thank you for that.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think one of the great questions you kind of asked me is like, what's something that's like consistently been fervent that I've done in my coaching career. I have coached 11 years. And I do say it's intentional. I'm being intentional with conversations outside of what your players are doing. Like I'm sure you and I do a lot of reading, right? And so you're engaged in lots of leadership books. Business and sports always seem to intermix or overlap. The most common narrative is how much people don't want to be a cog in a wheel or transactional interactions. And when you get into a competitive environment, there's so much justification of that. Like you just get transactional and you get like, this is what they're producing and these are their numbers and this is what we're getting from this person or that person. And here's what the matchup is. Here's what we need. And that's not, it shouldn't always be at the forefront. And for me, it hasn't been at the forefront.
Sadly, Sadly, it's one of the necessary evils of that environment, of the sporting environment. It's always going to rear its head. The necessity to at times be transactional, and that kind of was going to lead me to the first thing I wanted to ask you is the evolution of coaching right now is to be transformative. I have my own opinion of that. I think that, and I don't want to steal your thunder or go off on a side tangent with this, but I think that being a transformational leader is greater than being a transactional leader, of course. However, what is happening, we can be transformational when the player is with us in our program, whether that's for 1 year, 2 years, 4 years, or however many years it may be. But what happens to them once they leave us? And that's where my problem with being a transformational leader takes place, because if we are only asking them to be transformational, to transform into what we expect of them when they are with us, then are we really seeing a change of heart? Or are we just conditioning a change in behavior?
Oof, great question.
And so, what I would like for you to tell me is, in your experience, how does being intentional in your words, actions, and everything in between lead you from being transactional to transformational? And then we can talk about the next evolution there.
I think the biggest change from transactional and transformative is checking your competitive spirit. There are so many coaches that justify so many behaviors, and it's just because they're competitive. And if you're leading always in your competitive spirit, you're it's too linear. It's too tunnel vision. And you and I always talked about people don't know how much you care until they know, or people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And so I'm always leading with an emotion, and I'm not gonna I just can't operate always in like, this is me, this is a competitive spirit, this is how I coach, and you can either be on this team or not. Like
Mhm.
that doesn't, how, have you felt connected by that?
You're right.
I
Yeah, no, that would be enough.
No, I don't think any child has been like, I felt so connected to that coach because it was their way or the highway, and they just justified a lot of ill feelings over because they were competitive and they just had to win. And
Mhm.
so the transformative side is taking your competitive hat off. It's taking it off and just meeting your kids where they're at. And so obviously we both went through a pandemic together. Obviously the nation went through a pandemic, but the biggest regression from middle school to, he said, I believe the data was like mid 20s, was mental health. And
Mhm.
so I can't go back to coaching basketball if I'm not intentionally adding in some type of mental health support. And you know what a lot of coaches do? They pawn it off on somebody else. We're just gonna get a sports psychologist in here. We're gonna get FCA in here. No, they play for you. They spend the most time with you. And so, one thing I've done is I had a schedule, and I rotated every one of my players, and I met with them for 30 minutes after a practice. And it was just once a week, and each kid took up a week. And I allowed, I created a safe environment. I checked in on them, and I checked in on everything. And they had a choice. I mean, if you get a gym rat, you know what? They kind of want to talk about their playing time. They kind of want to talk about basketball. And sometimes I allowed them to do that, but sometimes I tried to tear them off. And I'm always observant. So, hey, I meet with a kid. You know what I noticed? I saw your dad was in the stands the other day. I know her parents are divorced. How'd that make you feel? I know he doesn't come around often. Were you nervous? Did it impact your game? How's your relationship with him? Did he say good job? Like, just being intentional and being like, you noticed my dad was in the stands? Yeah, I noticed. How did that make you feel? Um, and just, hey, how's your grades? Because you and I were both in high school, so we could look up their grades. Hey, I was looking at your grades the other day because I did do that. Like, if I knew I was going to meet with this girl Summer during the week, I looked at her grades intentionally beforehand. I wasn't too happy with your physics grade. What's going on there? You were looking at my grades, coach? Like, it's amazing when you just get intentional about something small, then so many other things come out, and you really can coach better. You really can. And you can, and your kids better. And it's funny because when the season's over, when they graduate, the most common narrative I know I've had from former players after 11 years is, man, coach really cared more about me than just being a basketball player. And that's the emotion and the ideal that I want all my kids to feel and to know when they leave my program.
Do you find that comes really organic for you, or are there times where you struggle with it as well?
Um obviously we've talked about I've been at different levels, so I think being at different levels has made it challenging. In the high school level and the lower levels, that's been more intentional. At the higher levels, I haven't been a head coach at the higher level, so there were times where it was challenging to lead with that because of the respect of my head coach and just trying to do what they needed and things like that. So,
Mhm.
but when you kind of have more control, you have that like autonomy. So, but
Did you have coaches when when you were like throughout your career, not just when you were in middle school, high school, etc., but did you have coaches that poured into you like that, that
some,
helped
yeah,
you what to
yes.
look like?
So some yes and some no. I mean, I definitely pour more into my kids than my coaches ever poured into me. Um, so my high school career, I did play for one person for 4 years, which you have someone who's becoming a senior this year who will have been with you for 4 years, and that does create a very deep level of intimacy. Such formative years, right, from freshman to senior. So my high school coach would probably be one of the most influential people, but he wasn't as intentional on connecting with me about other things outside of basketball as much. And then I was really blessed. I went to a Christian college, so I had sports and faith integrated. And so I did have a little bit more intimacy in college, but it was really faith based, and there was a lot of encouragements about faith and walking with Christ. So, but you get to the Division 1 level, you get to the professional level, which I have been at, and there is a cutthroat mentality there, and there are some amazing coaches at those levels that are really trying hard to be more than that transactional coach. Um, but it is challenging. I will say real quick, I met with a girl after practice, and I did this rotation, and I had noticed that she had regressed in a competitive energy at practice. And so I addressed it with her. I was like, I've kind of really noticed that in the last like week and a half, um, you're not as, your competitive energy has gone down in practice, and I haven't seen, the best side of you. And she was like, and I go, you just don't seem like yourself. What's going on? And she's like, my dad just left my house because my parents are getting divorced. And I was shocked. I had no idea. I said, I'm so sorry to hear that. I really appreciate you telling me. How can I support you? And she was like, and she cried. I was like, wow, okay. And we had a great conversation. The next morning, there is a coffee on my coach's desk with a post it note from her. She said, I have been struggling for weeks, and you are the only one who noticed. I don't know about
So,
you,
so
coach, but I've never had a person get me a coffee. I was like,
I,
one of my
you and
players
I,
let me a coffee?
you,
Like,
you got me coffee several times.
I know, I buy you a coffee, but like, I was like, wow. And all I added was these social, emotional, mental health check ins, for 30 minutes once a week with each kid. And just, I was like, wow, I mean, why didn't I do this years ago?
Mhm. I'm glad you brought that up, and the reason being is I asked you those two questions. Do you find that um, that comes to you organically, and then did you have coaches that demonstrated that for you? Because for many, making the evolution from being transactional to transformational, that kind of leader is not easy. And so the first question for many will be, okay, well, how do I do that? And so if you would just tell us about, like, how you develop the, you mentioned awareness. I think that is a huge, huge coach's tool that goes undervalued. And it does take some time, like you said, developing the intimacy of the relationship and rapport with each player to be able to see those things. But it also is something you have to try to
Yeah.
be cognizant of. So just awareness. How do you develop that? What are some things you can do as a coach if you wish to be more of a uh, integrate more of the social emotional and develop a better relationship with your players and see them as people, because that's what we're getting to, right? Is how do I see them as a person instead of just a player, and get away from the data driven approaches, right? So how do you develop that, the awareness and things of that nature that give you a better look at them as a person?
I immediately think of how much I've reflected on my personal playing career, which was 12 years. And one of my favorite things about my father, and I've always wanted to be a head coach. I've not been a head coach. In regards to only having a program. But my father, when I was in the WNBA, when I was in Division One, when I was in Division Two, I really struggled with my head coaches. And my dad said, "It's okay. It's wonderful. You're learning what not to do." And I was like, "Oh my gosh, yes. Like, I don't want to bring this energy to practice. I don't want to make the child feel this way." And so just being aware of how people make other people feel, I think is huge. And reflecting on that in your career, whether it's you've been on a staff, whether it was you as a player, I'm very motivated to coach how I wish someone had coached me, what I wish someone had asked me, what I wish somebody had noticed. So much of coaching is parroted behavior. Agreed. Like, how many times are coaches just doing what other coaches are doing? And this is how my
All coaches beg, borrow, and steal. All.
beg and borrow and parrot, and they're like, they
Yeah.
don't critically think about how it, like, what, it blows my mind. I don't
So
know.
what I hear you saying then is the way you learned how to be more aware of what was going on with your players in their personal aspects is that you set out to be the coach you never had.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
What does that look like in an everyday setting? You gave us one example with you noticed a player's competitive drive, but because every person is so subjectively different in their mannerisms, the things they say, a lot of times they are good at masking the emotions they really feel and camouflaging those things. So then how do you differentiate your
I think,
awareness when it comes to a vast array of people on a team?
how do I differentiate? I think
Yeah.
really like just learning about them. Like, I really took time to learn about them. And I think it's easier in a high school. I see who they sit with at lunch. I watched them walk down the hall with that guy. Um, and so I know there's so many facets that are impacting them mentally and emotionally. Um, and so I think just like really being aware and just not just being like, hello, but like, who are they sitting with? Who do they surround themselves with? Who's in the stands when they have a game? No one. No one's watching them play. Okay. That might impact them. So in a high school situation, you and I definitely have lots of eyes on so many different dynamics. So for you can have differentiate your approach. Yeah, trying to think. I'm not answering your question very well.
No, that's great. You notice.
Yeah.
You notice who they're with and things that not just behaviors but common practices of theirs, people to hang out with, and what kind of people those people are. Which I'm so glad you brought that up. in the present coaching climate, one of the biggest issues all coaches anywhere at any level, save maybe the professionals, but we even saw in the men's World Cup last year with the U.S. men's national team how the blow up of a parent over their child's playing time, even though we're talking about grown adults, almost cost a head coach his job as the national team coach. So, in the coaching climate today, having a rapport, I won't even say rapport, having a relationship with a player's parent is a very slippery slope. Would you agree?
Totally.
But how important is it? How brave do we have to be? This is another one of those intentional steps, in my opinion. Um, how much do you invest in that relationship with the parent so that you can know more about the player?
You know what's interesting is because I have gotten so intentional with my players, they do the work for me because they feel it. They feel that I care about their grades, the boyfriend, the dad in the stands, the stress over AP testing. And when mom and dad don't say nice things about me at the dinner table or in the car ride home, my kids over time correct their parents. And I love that. And so I don't have to do too much legwork. If I stay true to who I am and I focus on caring deeply and intimately about each one of my kids, no matter how they perform, no matter if they're in my starting five or they sit on my bench, they do the work for me. And they have told me. It's amazing how it's crazy how they've come back to me and said, you know, my dad really didn't like what you did in that last play and he thinks I should be playing more and he didn't say nice things about you on the car ride home. But I said, Dad, stop. Coach is working really hard. She's doing what she needs to do. Or like, I don't care, Dad. Coach cares about me. She's helping me with a letter of recommendation for blah, blah, blah. It's amazing how they surprisingly have my back. I'm like, oh my gosh. And it's just beautiful. I also have been very communicative and transparent with my parents from the start. I intentionally reach out to them consistently. A lot of parents' unhappiness is a lack or of communication or a miscommunication from my experience. Now, there is truth, and you and I both have known this in our careers, and we've been together, that there's a unrealistic vision at times too on how they see their child. And that's I think it's natural. I'm not a parent, you are. Um and it's just like I kind of get them to, if that's the case, which I think you've had before and I've had before, I just ask them to get different coaches' visions or narratives about their child. You know, I in basketball you have AAU coaches, and so if they don't like my narrative, I'm like, that's fine. Go ask the AAU coach his narrative or her narrative. However, you are paying them, so hopefully they're true. But so I don't know if that helps.
No, that's great, actually. Something that I wish was made more available for brand new coaches that are coming out of college is more support, not just support in regard to someone to speak to about it and coach you through it, but also some examples of best practices of how to establish intentional relationships with parents. I think that the younger coaches that are coming into the profession now, because they are of a different generation and different cultural and societal expectations and practices, one of the things they lack is the personal side.
Mhm.
And that's the one thing that you just got through saying that parents crave
Yeah, and
is
it starts with a couple of things. I think they need help with boundaries. I keep hearing, even in corporate America, I'm hearing people out of college are terrible with professional boundaries. So I think there needs to be best practices around professional boundaries. It sounds like from what I am hearing around social media. And then I mean, you and I know, like when you're out of college, you're 23 years old, you're still very self-absorbed. And you think every game is about you and how you look and what the win or loss says about you. Whereas you and I are older now, and I don't have that mentality anymore. It's not all about me. It's always about the kids. It's always about the team. It's always about how we're working together. How is the staff I am on collaborating. Like it's not all about you. And so I think some best practices is a lot of what you talk about on this podcast, the selflessness that comes with leading. And there needs to be support with younger coaches, I think, on that too.
So, in your opinion, and this might put you on the spot for an answer because it's kind of a tough question, but in regard to teaching selflessness, if it is not already a practice of the person that has become this coach and stepped into that role as a coach, what would you say would be step number one if you were to tell them, hey, if you want to be a successful coach throughout your career from day one until the last day when you hang up your whistle or clipboard or whatever it may be, what does step one need to be in order to be intentionally selfless?
I think the first thing I'm doing is asking that coach to recall selfless modeling that he's seen. And I don't care if it is or hasn't been in the sports world. I want to hear about that person and I want to hear the story. Can you tell me the story of the most selfless person you've seen? What did they do? How did they make you feel? What did you take away or learn from them? And then I want to hear the next story and the next story. And if they don't have very many, then I know I can't wait to model this for you.
Mm-hmm.
Or I'd love to connect you with someone who can.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's that's what a lot of people, in my opinion, don't do well. They don't research. They don't get to know and like be intentional. They just like, let me tell you how to selflessly serve. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
This is what it looks like. And it, no, can I hear about this? Because they get emotional usually. The person who has modeled for you selfless leadership, you either get really emotional about it because it impacted you so much, or you get really excited about it because you can't wait to be just like them.
Mm-hmm.
Or at least that's how it is for me.
So what I hear you saying is the coach needs to be coached. Mentored, if you want to call it mentored.
Yeah.
If they can't recall a great exemplification of being selfless and have something to draw upon,
Mm-hmm.
then they need some coaching.
Yeah, and I really think it's always modeling. I think modeling is the best form of coaching. Stop talking at young people. And don't just hand them a book. That's a lot of coaches. Let me talk at you and then let me hand you a book. No, either you go chapter by chapter with each other or you ask really good questions. So let's say I see myself as a selfless leader. Okay. I'm going to have you come to my practice. And at the end, I'm going to ask you, this is very much teaching best practice teaching models. You tell me what you saw and how you think that's selfless.
Mm.
And have them come up with behaviors that model selflessness. Because that's really what you're looking for. You're looking for selfless behaviors and you're hoping there's a heart condition that aligns with it, right? With it, a very authentic emotion that's not ulterior, but that's what you hope.
I love it. What I hear from you is you give them the canvas and you start painting, but then let them continue the brush strokes, how they want it to transform, right? What they want their leadership to turn into, how it's going to look for them. Yeah. Yeah.
And I will be honest, and we don't need to dig into this can of worms because it's a big can. But NLI is losing selflessness. NLI is making our student athletes become more self-absorbed than they've ever been. And so this call, the need of selfless leaders feels like it's going to be harder. Feels like it's going to be harder than it's ever been, because I have friends at the collegiate level, at higher levels, who are telling me kids just come in and ask how much money they can get for NLI. They're not looking to serve, buy into a program and step into a process and get, and I'm sure you've heard it's coming to the high school level, and
It is.
coaches are going to have a harder job than we've ever had before, in my professional opinion, on teaching selflessness and being a servant leader.
Mm-hmm.
I know that's a big can of worms, but
it is. It is. That could be a whole nother episode in
yeah,
itself.
we could do another episode on that. But I'm like worried.
Likewise, I noticed, and I don't know the validity to it, but I saw a news blurb in some social media outlet that Duke is one of the only, if not the only, college that has not had any athlete in any of their programs enter the transfer portal.
I did not know that.
I'm going to have to look.
And I'm like a diehard Duke fan. How do I not know this?
You are. That's right. You went to a Duke.
I'm a diehard Duke fan, and I don't know how I know this.
I don't know the validity of that. I'm going to find out. But if that is the case, what kind of secret sauce do they have going on? Because that they could be, just with that, in keeping with that idea of selflessness, how do you keep, especially a Duke, if you're an athlete at a Duke, you could probably go just about anywhere in almost every sport, right?
Of course, I want to say it's their education, like the...
that could be the draw, but there's got to be something else, right? I mean, it can't be just, oh, well, it's, the academics are great. Well, there are other schools that have great academics and even better athletics as well. But
right.
So, what else is keeping them there? There's got to be something to that. I'm going to have to look into that. But
yeah,
this time of the season for all high schools is the wrapping up season. The end of all activities is quickly approaching. And with that comes player evaluations. So talk to us about what are best practices around player evaluations, and how can you use awareness, intentional care, intentional valuing of the person to help deliver what might be the hardest conversation you'll have with these players that we have, because you have to tell them the truth and the perspective you have.
So I love evaluations. I never get nervous for them. I am always excited because you and I both have a growth mindset. And so it's really about their growth. It's not about performance, which lots of coaches, in my opinion, don't have that approach. We have the same evaluation sheet. And so they self-evaluate, and then I evaluate, and then we come together with the same sheet and the same questions and or, benchmarks, rankings, whatever you have. And we go through each one, and they are always starting, and they are always explicitly explaining to me why they've ranked themselves at whatever rate they have. Now, that is more powerful than them sitting there and me telling them what I think and me telling them what they did or didn't do. They need to be a part of the process. They need to self-reflect. The awareness piece that you're talking about, how do you get to kids to be aware? Constant self-reflection. My kids are constantly reflecting, constantly. I ask them more questions than I tell them what to do. That's one of my biggest keys. I ask more questions than I tell them what to do. How did we play? How was our adjustments? How did you think our defense went? What did you think about our offense? How did we guard number 25? Remember in the scouting report, 25? How did we, instead of me, we didn't guard 25. We didn't, I don't tell them. I ask. I have them reflect. I have them talk about what they're seeing, what they felt, what they saw. There are moments I do not see the same thing, and I'm thankful that they're telling me because I don't know.
I hope you took away some of the same things that I did from the first part of this conversation with Coach Petit. One, set aside time for your people. Regardless of the environment that you lead in, set aside time, make it a constant, make it a norm, make it an expectation, make it something they don't just look forward to, but they rely on, because they can rely on you. When you are intentional with your relationships and the approach that you take, you build a bridge of trust between you and each person that you lead, and you show them their value. You show them that they can rely on you and trust you. You show them that you are going to put down your life, your job, the things you have to do, your work, in order to just hear them. Secondly, watch them. What are they not telling you? Take in the things that they communicate to you verbally, but also take in the things that they communicate to you physically. What's their body language look like? What are their mannerisms? What are their facial expressions and the vernacular that they use? Get to know your people. Form a relationship with them so that you can tell when they use certain vernacular in times of stress, anxiety, joy, sadness. That way you can intentionally ask better questions to dig at what is causing their joy or what is causing their anxiety and how you can better support them. Get to know the names of their family. Know the things that matter to them. Dig down deep and find out those things. This will only strengthen the connection that you have with each person you lead. And when you do that, you model for them servant leadership and being intentional in all of your actions, words, and deeds, so that they can repeat the process with one another. Being intentional in your leadership creates a culture of intentional relationship building. And what environment doesn't need that? That's a rhetorical question. We all do, regardless of our role as a leader, regardless of the environment in which we lead, whether it be military, sports, corporate, or anything in between. We all need to be more intentional in the relationships that we have with the people that we lead. Pay attention. Be aware. In the second episode, we're going to discuss even further with Coach Petit what being intentional looks like and how necessary it is for new coaches and for coaches that are struggling with this process, and some steps that you can take to help you create the habit of being intentional, but most importantly, so that you see the importance of it. I hope you've enjoyed this discussion with Coach Petit. She is wise beyond her years. I look forward to her getting back into the coaching game. She has taken a year off in order to just become more intentional in the relationships she has outside of education and of sport. And to hear her discuss those things shows me the same level of honest and sincere desire to be a better person. There is not enough time or enough podcasts, as I stated in the show, for you to take away the things you need to take away from Coach Lisa Petit. I hope that what she has said to you has been so very impactful. Get ready, because in the second episode, she's going to impact you even further. I hope you have had a blessed weekend, have rested, and are ready to go and be intentional with the people that you lead this week. Everything you do matters, leader. Everything. Every word you utter. Every detailed attention you give to meetings. Everything matters. let's go be intentional this week.